Tim McCutcheon from Talisman Metals joins us now. Hello, Tim. Good to see you.
Yes, likewise. Thank you.
So, Tim, tell us the latest at Talisman. What's been going on?
Um, well, we went through a fairly long process of getting readmitted to AIM. That process was finished January 29th. So we've really only been in our current format for a couple of weeks. Um, the what Talisman Metals is, it's a AIM listed company. Currently has a market cap of around 7, 8 million pounds, with a focus on copper exploration and asset development in Morocco. The team has been sort of hand selected, if you will, and assembled over the course of the past year, to basically have a lean company that is very focused with professionals that are dedicated to advancing the company without any fluff. So what's exciting for me as a manager who's put this together is everyone who's a part of the story adds value, and everyone who's a part of the story is someone who is really dedicated to the vision because they're getting in on the ground floor. There's no sort of leftovers, there's no hand-me-downs, there's no inheritance sort of situation. This is really a company that's been designed very methodically and on purpose to achieve a task. So we have two projects in Morocco. Now we have a third. We just announced actually 2 days ago, actually yesterday, excuse me. And those projects are all really based on sediment-hosted copper deposits in Morocco, based on a pretty proven model for these types of deposits in this part of the world, in part because one of the largest development projects, mining projects in Africa, is pretty much smack in the middle of two of our projects. And it's the same type of mineralization, it's the same type of material, the same operating environment. And the company developing that is called Managem. It's one of the largest mining companies in Morocco. It will produce 40,000 tons of copper a year. The project's called Tsert, and it's going into production as we speak. So that's really sort of the benchmark, if you will, for us moving forward. And we have two projects to the east and the west of that that really sort of mimic and are very similar to the main Tsert mine. So we have, if you will, a benchmark to look at to look at what to do, what not to do. We are the beneficiaries of all of the know-how that Managem has sort of worked through to get to this point. And so that means the learning curve is going to be not as arduous, and from a shareholder point of view, going to be cheaper in terms of us figuring out how to develop these projects efficiently.
So, some of our viewers and listeners might be surprised to hear that one of the biggest development projects in Africa is in Morocco. I mean, it's a well-known mining district to some degree, but it's not really the top of everyone's list for copper.
Yeah,
So tell
yeah,
us a
yeah.
little bit about Morocco, where it sort of sits in the world of mining, and why you think it's a good place to be.
Yeah, and that's um let's take a step. Well, I'll take your question and take it one step further. I mean, ultimately, in any sort of investment situation, there needs to be a combination of factors for you to be successful beyond just being lucky. Luck obviously helps, but you need a catalyst event. So, like, why are things different now as opposed to a day ago or a year ago or whatever? You need that catalyst event, and you need to know things other people don't know, right? If I buy a dollar for a dollar, the chances of me making money on that is pretty low. If I buy a dollar for 50 cents, because I'm the only person who knows it happens to be 50 cents, then the chances of making money on that particular transaction are very high. The catalyst event for Morocco is complete change of the mining code, right? So the regulatory environment in which miners operate completely changed, basically starting 2016. Prior to that, the mining code, I think, was last drafted in 1950, and prior to that, 1920. So it was a framework where basically entrepreneurs and international business companies, they couldn't operate in the mining sector in Morocco in any sort of reasonable way. And so mining's been around Morocco for, since for millennia, but in an organized public market format, proper corporate governance and everything else, that frankly wasn't possible until 2016. So that's number one. The regulatory environment completely changed. Um, Number two is Morocco does have a long, rich mining tradition. It's one of the world's largest miners of phosphate material for fertilizer, one of the key fertilizer ingredients. And so they know how to do mining. And if you even drive around Morocco, you will see sort of smaller scale mining operations, in various places. So there is a certain know-how, there's certain understanding, tolerance, living with mining in the country. So it's nothing new there. But again, a guy like me coming into that country, setting up an operation, using the regulatory framework in a way that allows us to, raise capital, develop assets, and everything else, that's a new phenomenon. So that's Morocco, top down, and because it is new, but because Mother Nature's put a lot of interesting geography and geology in Morocco, um, that environment is getting more and more players involved. And in fact, if your listeners and readers, just observe, they will see, over and over again, new people coming into Morocco with capital, with teams. And frankly, that's good for us because you want to have an ecosystem where there are lots of players, all of them looking for M&A transactions, development things, bringing in new talent and everything else. Some of these African countries are very small, and if you're the only player in that country, it's very hard to really get anything done because you can't get talent involved. There's no one else who understands what you're talking about because it's completely unknown to anyone else. On a more granular level, what makes Morocco interesting for us in particular is one of the key guys on our team used to be a leading geologist for Managem. And Managem, their main project is this teaser deposit that they're putting into production now, which happens, as we mentioned earlier, is basically connected geologically and the know-how of our other projects in that country. So this fella and basically the know-how he brings with him will be able to deploy. And basically that addresses the question, we know things other people don't know because by virtue of having him, as part of our team. Um, and that's another aspect of, can this company add value beyond just being lucky? And the answer to that, I think, is unequivocally yes.
Right. So let's talk about these sediment hosted copper projects then. And you mentioned T-Zert. I mean, first off, perhaps we can locate them within Morocco. Whereabouts are they
Yeah.
located inside Morocco?
So if you think of Morocco, the very, very far north is Tangier, which essentially you're looking at Gibraltar. And then you go a
Yeah.
little further down is on the coastline is Rabat, which is the capital. And then about an hour and a half south of that is Casablanca. And that's all on sort of the northern coast of the country. Pretty much smack in the middle is a city called Marrakesh, which is famous for tourism and it's an ancient sort of trading route, a town and everything else. And Marrakesh lies sort of at the foothills of the Atlas Mountains, which essentially bisect the country from southwest to the northeast. Um, due south of Marrakesh, about a 4-hour drive, in the middle of the Atlas Mountains, or a plateau, if you will, sort of as part of that mountain range, is T-Zert. So it's roughly as the crow flies, it's about 150 kilometers due south. But because of the nature of the mountains, it takes, about 4.5 hours to drive there. And so to the west of T-Zert is our T-Zert project. I know it's a little confusing, but the main thing is called Fugnar. That's our main license area. It's on our website. To the east of T-Zert is a project we just acquired. As I mentioned, we announced it yesterday called Terzit. And they're both sort of equidistant to the Managem mine going into production.
Right. So what's the plan with these projects then? What sort of stage are they at, and where do you want to take them?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, your listeners, what we need to do is sort of think of why we're excited about this particular type of project.
Yeah.
Um, The copper world historically has been, the holy grail has been finding a gigantic copper porphyry. And for non-geologists, a porphyry is best described as, Mother Nature has like burped and the burp didn't actually exit the surface. So it's like a contained bubble of mineralization essentially within the Earth's crust. When they work, they're enormous and they kind of have to be enormous because you're essentially mining usually fairly low grade stuff, but underground, but it works just due to volume. So if you think about the gigantic copper mines in Chile, for example, they're all porphyries, right? Where they're mining 0.3%, 0.5% copper, but they're just mining in massive, massive quantities because of the nature of the mineralization, where it's just all over the place and very uniform bubble, if you will, trapped underground. Um, the and so most juniors and most people in my position, you would always target going after porphyries because that's where the big payout was. Recently, what's happened though is just inflation and everything. There's a reason why gold's trading at $5,000 an ounce. There's a reason why, all of these metal prices are going up. It's basically the outward manifestation of inflation across the board. And that inflation has impacted CapEx costs. So, you know, 10, 15 years ago, a large porphyry would have, $1 billion to $2 billion CapEx, right? Which was an enormous amount of money, but it was still kind of within the realm of doable. That same type of project now is an $8 billion CapEx project. And there's basically very few players that can even think about that kind of a price tag.
Hmm.
So if you're a junior and you're going after a porphyry, in order for a porphyry to work, it has to be huge. If a porphyry is huge, there's really one or two companies in the world that can actually take it on. And so if those companies don't buy you out effectively or partner with you, you're stuck and there's nowhere for you to go. And again, if some of your readers and listeners might look at the marketplace and they will very well see junior mining companies with porphyries that are interesting and exciting and good drill results, but they're not quite big enough to get bought out or they're in, who knows why. And they're stuck. Sediment-hosted copper deposits, they're a bit of a game changer in the industry. They've been ignored forever because people said, "Oh, they're kind of difficult to go after. They don't really tend to be very big, everything else." Well, some of them do tend to be very big. The issue really with sediment-hosted copper deposits is that layer of sediment that contains the mineralization. Is it thick enough to mine commercially? I mean, no one is going to commercially mine a layer of mineralization that's 50 centimeters wide. Like you just physically can't get at it with modern equipment, right? You need that layer of mineralization to be wide enough that you can actually drive a truck into it, pull it out of the mountain, process it, and then create your copper. Um, Desert, which we've discussed quite a bit on the program, but Desert is really the best example of that. You're talking about the width of mineralization being anywhere from 5 to 50 meters wide, which means that you can basically drive mechanized equipment in there and pull out massive quantities of material that has copper in it. Despite all of that, the cost of getting a sediment-hosted copper deposit into production tends to be an order of magnitude less than a porphyry. So this project that Managem has is going to cost about $800 million all in to build this thing, which is a far shy away from multiple billions of dollars that a porphyry now requires. So it's doable, is basically what I'm trying to say. It's doable for a fairly wide audience of potential, mining companies and investors to have a crack at. That's what we're going after. That's sort of what the whole world's going after. One of the most breakthrough revolutionary companies in the space is called Ivanhoe Mines. They have a sediment-hosted copper deposit in the DRC. And they were the ones that sort of broke the mold that said, hey, these types of deposits actually are very viable. They are doable, and you make a lot of money exploiting them. And that sort of broke the mold and opened the door for everyone else to get into the space. Morocco is rife with sediment-hosted copper deposits. The question that anyone exploring Morocco has is my particular project going to have enough width in that mineralized horizon to be economically viable from is it commercially mineable? That's where we're different, I think. What we're targeting and why what we're going after is exciting and new and kind of on the cutting edge of where the industry is going.
So how do you go about delineating a sediment-hosted copper deposit then? I mean, presumably it's drills of a certain fence type and off you go and you establish a resource just like any other project.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, there are a few things that make them different. I mean, in general, you either want them to be completely vertical or completely horizontal, because they tend not to be very, very wide. I mean, you're looking for something 5 meters plus. If it's 5 meters or more, you can use mechanized equipment to take it out, without too much of a problem. Once you get a little skinnier than that, it starts to get more and more difficult because effectively you're mining waste, right? The good thing about, when you think about it, though, is that that sediment, because it's a sediment-hosted deposit, when you're mining it, you pretty much know what is ore and what is waste because you can physically see it, right? It's just layer upon layer upon layer of different sediments, and the sediment that hosts the mineralization will stick out like a sore thumb. So when you get to the point of engineering these things, you know what it is you're supposed to go after because you can actually put your hand on it and see it. Um, the other issue about what makes it a little different, I think, than maybe some of the other projects, with a porphyry, you're looking for, hundreds of meters of mineralization, right? It's that trapped bubble, if you will, underground. When you're going after a VMS deposit or a skarn, Mother Nature sort of scrambled them up a little bit. They're a different process the way they're formed. And so it's harder to tag into them and it's harder to get those huge widths, but you tend to get higher grade, right? So with a VMS or a skarn type deposit, um, you're looking at, can I get enough zones of mineralization strung together to have enough material to justify building a mine? Because each zone on its own tends to be not very big. It tends to be a couple of meters to maybe 20 meters or so, but you're never going to get like hundreds and hundreds of meters of VMS or skarn material. With a sediment-hosted copper deposit, what the learning curve is, if you will, for the investor public is you're never going to get these massive intervals of mineralization, and that's not really what you're looking for. What you're looking for is essentially a pancake. Think of a chocolate layer cake. You're looking for that layer of frosting that's 5 meters thick that continues over a fairly large area, right? That's what you're looking for. Um, because they're younger than other types of deposits, sediment-hosted deposits usually, and at least in our part of the world, about 500 million years old, right? Whereas a lot of this other stuff is billions of years old. I mean, if you go south in the greenstone belts in Western Africa, they're 2 to 3 billion years old. So Mother Nature has scrambled them up a lot more than where we are. What that means is statistically, they're more predictable because of just the very nature they were formed in the first place. They're a more predictable type of deposit. So if you think about resource calculations is taking data points, basically inputting the type of deposit you have, and then statistically saying how close do my data points need to be for me to reasonably assume that the material between point A and point B is consistent. In the case of some of the like a VMS deposit or some that sorts of things, where it's basically cracking open the mountainside and the material comes through that crack, that spacing can be as narrow as 40 to 50 meters before you can basically confidently say it's, a resource. In the case of a sediment-hosted copper deposit, that spacing can be up to 200 and plus meters between drill hole spacing. So again, one of the advantages of what we have is when we tap into it and we get a real handle of what it is, we'll be able to get numbers on the board with less data than you would normally associate with a project at that stage of development by the very nature of a sediment hosted deposit.
So there's quite a lot of interesting information in the answer you gave there. I guess one direction to go in is the processing. So if you have sediment hosted copper, is it easier to process than copper that's found in other ores?
Generally, yeah. I mean, because it is, basically just stuff that's flown down from it was on an ocean floor and just stuff kind of, falling down and then under pressure and time becomes rock. So there's no issue with like breaking up sulfides and things like that. There's no quartz hard rock that you got to deal with. So in general, it will crush and grind easier than other types of projects, other types of material that you would process. Um, yeah, I mean, I mean, the short answer is yes. In theory, this will be an easier rock to process than other types of projects.
So you get the sediment hosted copper project fairly easy to process, but the mining itself, I mean, do these sediments that host the copper, do they present at depth, near to the surface? Is it a variable situation?
Yeah, so I encourage your listeners to look at our website. If you look at the project page, there is a video, and essentially what the video shows, and what I'm about to describe is you're thinking of sediments as layers, layers, like a chocolate layer cake, and then for whatever reason, erosion maybe scoops out part of that cake. And that very bottom layer of mineralization, like right before the cake is sitting on a plate, and that plate is essentially a particular sediment layer that is thicker and resists erosion than all the other layers, right? Well, that thickness, that density, that resistance to erosion works both ways. And what it means is that on the top down, it has stopped from eroding below that. But from the bottom up, mineral bearing material came up through the earth, hit that layer, and instead of going through it, it basically pancaked out below it. So think of like, you're pouring syrup on a plate, but sort of take that process and churn it upside down. That's essentially how sediment-hosted copper deposits are formed, right? Where this copper mineralization comes up and just kind of pancakes out all along. Um, so the way you would mine it, frankly, is almost like a coal seam, right? If it's horizontally, you're just going in horizontally and taking out material, leaving pillars in place so the roof doesn't fall in on you.
Yeah.
But that's sort of the whole idea of how, just from a physical engineering point of view, you go about getting at it.
So, how far along are you guys then in terms of delineating the scale and scope of your own
Well,
deposits?
it's pretty early stage. I mean, I've freely admitted in the past, and I'll admit it here. I mean, it is an early stage project. What makes it different than other early stage projects is exploration is all about removing risk, right? And some of the three main risks are, do you actually have metal there? The metal that you have there, is it of a grade that you could process commercially? And then is there enough material that you could actually build a mine? We know we have the metal because it outcrops the surface.
Right.
So and again, what makes Morocco really neat is you can fly to Marrakesh, we discussed earlier, you can drive in your car, you can park your car, you can walk 100 meters, and there's copper mineralization outcropping a surface that's never been drilled. There aren't a lot of places in the world that is true, that you can actually pull that off, right? So we have copper mineralization very visible at surface within a road, cell phone service, and a power line.
Right.
Pretty rare for that to happen. That material's been tested. It has a grade that is comparable, it has a grade that is commercial and a grade that's comparable to what it is going in the production next to us, which is the T-Zert mine, right? So dancing around 1% copper, dancing around 1 ounce per ton silver. So the remaining question is there enough of this stuff that you could justify building a mine? And that's what we're going to do. And we don't have an answer to that yet, but that's essentially the risk reward matrix that an investor is buying into, right? Is that we have a project that is early stage, and yet a lot of the risk factors are already addressed. And so you're for a comparable early stage project that other companies might have, we are much more de-risked by the very nature of the target we're going after.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got a lot to go on there. So, what are your next steps, Tim?
Next steps are hitting the project with field work, getting those results into the existing database, building out the database so that we can move towards having a resource. That's the next step. So it's going to be pretty methodical from here and out, which is geophysics, trenching, sampling, drilling, all of that comprehensively put into calculations to tally up a resource. And then from there, expanding that resource, metallurgical test work, everything else to get to the point where we could engineer, do a feasibility study and everything else.
So, investors famously love drilling above all other forms of
Yep.
sampling and testing. When do you think you might be drilling?
I will be drilling by the end of this quarter.
Right. So
So
that's
in the next several months, we should be drilling and having results coming up.
and how much drilling do you think you'll be undertaking?
Well, you don't want to drill blindly and just waste money hoping to God you hit something, right? You want to
Yeah.
be a little more methodical. So, the first program will be modest, a couple thousand meters. But again, the nature of what we have, the holes will be shallow because they don't need to be deep. You don't really need to drill below that. Remember, we talked about that layer cake sitting on the plate that's harder, and that's called the basal series. You don't really want to drill much further than the basal series because that's where all your mineralization is. So we'll be able to get away with drilling fairly shallow holes, but we'll be able to get a whole bunch of them in, and 3,000 meters will be more than enough to really have a first stab at a resource calculation and understanding sort of where things stand.
So is that on one or both of your projects that you're talking about?
Well, for now, like remember at the top of the program, we talked about being a lean team. So we are a lean team. So I
Yeah.
think we're gonna hit one project at a time.
Right.
We do have a limited budget, so we can't just go completely nuts. And frankly, we have limited just human resources to get things done. So we want to stay focused, and spend that money wisely. And there is a danger to getting too much data all at once because by the time you figure out what you have, you may have made a mistake if you would, that you would not have made had you been more methodical from the beginning.
Sure. So you mentioned cell phone reception and proximity to Marrakesh and roads, but I
Mhm.
wonder if there are any logistical challenges about operating in the Atlas Mountains.
It depends on where you are. Where we are with Turzit and Teaser, the logistical problems are very small. It's certainly one of the best places I've ever seen as a project to work at. It's easy to get to. The roads are very well maintained. If you have a flat tire, there's help that you can get, and there's cell phone service you can call help. You're not in the middle of nowhere. Um, no, for your readers, I mean, if you haven't been to Morocco, I can tell you you'll be very impressed. I certainly was. They're going to be hosting the World Cup in several years from now, I think 2030, together with Spain and Portugal. There's an enormous amount of infrastructure built out in anticipation of that event, and we're the beneficiaries of it. But Morocco never ceases to surprise me in terms of the dedication the government has to making it sort of bringing it into the modern world. I mean, the quality of getting around is really top notch.
Right. Yeah. And you mentioned at the top of the show or near to the beginning of our conversation that a lot of mining companies have been moving into Morocco following the
Hmm.
adjustments to the code there. Did you face any particular competition from Aussies or Canadians to get the assets that you've got now?
Well, yeah, there certainly are players coming in. We started this process over a year ago, so we're certainly not first movers, but we got in sort of earlier, I think, than other people. We only were readmitted to the exchange, as we mentioned, at the very end of January, but tying down those assets happened, at the end of 2024, really, in terms of just, the initial conversations and then actually signing a definitive LOI in May of 2025. So, but they are coming. Other players are coming. One of the things I don't like about the Moroccan sort of regulatory environment is they cap each license size at 4 by 4 kilometer size. So district scale, kind of just, grab a huge chunk of land and sort of figure out what to do with it later. That's not possible there. So you have to be a little more disciplined and focused, which means if you don't have someone on the ground who sort of basically done that preliminary due diligence geologically, you can waste a lot of time in Morocco just going after moose pasture, right? Because you kind of have to know what you're going after before you get it, because you can't just sort of grab a huge chunk of land and then hope you find something on it. So that will be a barrier to entry for people on the outside coming in for sure. Um, Something to keep in mind.
Do you need a local partner to be able to operate in Morocco?
You need a local partner anywhere to operate. I mean, that's yeah. I mean, legally, no. But you'd be crazy if you didn't have one.
Yeah. So perhaps just as we begin to wrap it up now, Tim, you could maybe rehash what the likely news flow from the company is going to look like over the coming months. I mean, we've talked through quite a lot of it, but I think it might be useful to sort of bullet point, what's going to happen
Yeah,
again.
yeah, yeah. So we're hitting the ground on our Fugnar project, and again, I encourage your people, listeners and readers to look at the website. So Fugnar will get the bulk of the attention in the next 4 to 6 weeks, and then results of that will be published in terms of geophysical work, sampling work, mapping, and then drilling. So keep an eye on that. when that work is available and done, we will shift to Terzit, the acquisition that we announced yesterday, which is a former Aya silver and gold project. Um, Aya is focused on gold and silver, precious metals, and they had this copper project in their stable. They realized they didn't want to really devote time to it and stay focused on precious metals. So we are the beneficiaries of their corporate restructuring. We have that project now. That was announced yesterday, and then you're going to see after the Fugnar 4 to 6 week sort of work horizon, you're going to see work and results of that work on Terzit in the 6 to 10 weeks after that. Um, and then we will go back to Fugnar to basically use the results of the first campaign of exploration to follow up with, or essentially the same thing, but with more information to carry it forward. So yeah, you're going to have a lot of field work done and the results of that out for the next 6 months. In terms of corporate development, the Argana project, which is another one that we have, it's a little bit different in terms of the others. We're probably looking for some sort of strategic solution to that, whether divest it locally or something like that. So that's something to keep an eye out for. And then, our shareholder roster, the people who are our fans and our cheerleaders is pretty impressive. For a little company with a pretty high profile in terms of people involved. First and foremost, Aya Gold and Silver owns just shy of 5% of the company. They bought into this placement. So I would encourage your readers to also anticipate, basically stuff happening out of London, right? In terms of corporate moves that we're going to make to raise the profile of the company and to basically get the awareness out there and everything else that we exist and that we're a newcomer to Morocco, but a strong newcomer with the money and the investor attention and the management team to pull things forward. So plenty of news for 6 months at least.
And in the meantime, the context in terms of commodities prices, mining equity markets seems to be reasonably benign, if not actively positive and
Yeah. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt. Look, I mean, the junior mining space in general is sort of, ebbs and flows by just liquidity in general. When people have money and they're deploying that capital in the market, junior mining tends to benefit. And when people are pulling liquidity out, of course, we don't benefit from it. But I do think, and I'm sure you share the sentiment that there is a bit of a paradigm shift in terms of the way the world is looking at sort of boring things like mining, because I think we spent so much time, and this is anyone in the mining space has been saying this for, as long as they care to remember, which is at the end of the day, all these computer programs and everything else, they need raw materials to build computers and they need raw materials, all of this raw materials thing, which has been boring for so long, the consequence of it being ignored for so long is starting to come to a head. And I'm sure you've spoken about this with other people as well, which is we know there is a massive copper supply deficit on the horizon. We know there's a massive deficit of every metal on the horizon. And it's just becoming more and more visible. And again, inflation happens for a reason, right? There is a fiscal reason that governments print more money, but there's also a supply reason where you got a whole lot of people who want this material for their growing business plans, and yet that material isn't available. Hence higher prices, which is stimulating companies like me, my company, to move forward and supply that demand with new material.
Well, we look forward to lots of progress from Talisman Metals. Great to see you guys back on the market as well. Tim McCutcheon, for now, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.